Hey everybody, this is Brian here, and we're going to be doing part 3 of my favorite 20 wrestlers unranked. I think I've done 10 in the past towards the beginning of the channel, but I really wanted to give this a proper, uh, uh, you know, I guess dissection or look into it. I really wanted to get in detail into why these are my favorite wrestlers, and this is purely opinionated and it's totally out of order. So let's get way back into why I was picking Sabu, one of the faces and classic ECW characters. Um, I think that his tag team with RVD was amazing, and he could also carry a singles feud without even having to talk. It was just the length he was willing to go to. But because he was kind of a high flyer, it was like a combination of like Lucha and Mick Foley or something like that. And I just think that Sabu's feuds they carried an air of I think that's where the "Please Don't Die" chants really uh, came from, and if they didn't originate there, they certainly deserve to be called out by the crowd because Sabu's feuds carried this feeling of, oh man, what are they gonna do next? Perhaps more than anyone else who wrestled in the hardcore style who's been on this list prior, I think Sabu is one of those guys who yeah, I like a barbed wire ring rope match, but I think that it's a little bit much in the inflation and kind of the devaluing. Is a match like Piper versus like Jimmy Snuka or a guy like Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, something that's going to be totally awesome in the ring, dream match, or if it actually happened. I think that a guy like Sabu, as much as I love him and I've watched numerous matches of him, I wish he'd get his own DVD instead of just ECW unreleased. As much as I love Sabu, I feel like he's also kind of complicit in making it so people had to go farther and farther, and they had to bleed more. He added a gallon of blood to that requisite of what you had to give of yourself in order to please the fans, and the fans' standards became in terms of regarding a wrestler's, if they were regarding wrestler's safety or if they were regarding kayfabe, they just became more bloodthirsty, and it became a standard that was more unrealistic in the sense of not really being able to safely be matched again. Jeff, every time he does that ladder jump, it just has to be a higher ladder next time, or else people will think, okay, this is the starting spot that's really getting the match going. But it's meant to be the end or something. It's meant to be the 3 count, but people treat it like it's like a signature move or it's like a comeback move. Like they treat the kip up like the sweet chin music, so to speak. Um, let's get on to number 9 on here, which is going to be back to WWE for a minute. It's going to be Edge. Um, Edge might not have been Van Gogh in the ring, but he was Van Gogh in terms of having a wrestling mind. He was, I think, one of the most brilliant people in terms of not only being able to adapt to something outlandishly stupid like a vampire character. It's like if you can play a bad character well like that, then you're definitely a great wrestler. Look at how Mick Foley got over with Dude Love, which was the stupidest thing I've ever heard of, but no one remembers that 70s guy despite Mike Awesome's amazing talent. So you gotta have some real stage presence and acting ability and presence on the mic in terms of just your ability to cut a promo. You really got to have that to make a shitty character work. I think that's why they bury young upcoming talent with a shitty gimmick. It's because like you give them probably I don't know if Steve Austin was the only guy who could have worked as Stone Cold, but probably it would have taken a really, really bad, like Santino Marella level wrestler for that to completely tank. It probably would have been at least a mid card level semi popular thing. But I think that um, really, Edge was one of those guys who was able to adapt to the times, whether it was as a cartoony vampire or a surfer bra kind of guy, or whether he played up that real life heat that he was getting for having an affair with Lita, who I think they turned that into the very, very sensitive towards the wrestlers' personal lives feud between Matt Hardy and Edge. But Edge is a multiple time Hall of Famer, and I know that titles are kind of like wins in baseball, and that it's largely due to circumstance, not just the guy's ability. So keep that in mind. But Edge always, he was hardcore. He did TLC matches. You might think back more of Hardy and the Dudley Boys with their "Get the Tables" chant. You might think of Jeff's crazy dives, which continued later into his career on Money in the Bank, his match versus Punk, anywhere he went, pretty much. Um, I think that Edge was hardcore too. His role in those matches was underrated. From that crazy spear off of the actual the thing the belt was being hung um, from that to the time that he I think speared Mick Foley straight into a flaming table. And Mick had a shirt on, but Edge was just wearing pants, and he was the one who went face first into there. So he really got the worst of it, even though he was doing the offensive move. Um, Not very practical, but nothing in wrestling is. So don't think about it. You know, don't think too much about it, at least. Um, I think Edge could work though, as a character and as a person in any scenario, and he did. He was able to. It's not one of those things where it's kind of like you think back at guys like respectable wrestlers who I'm about to mention, guys like Triple H, Kevin Nash. You think of Kane. You think of guys who had really stupid gimmicks early in their career, and it's almost like WWE's trying to test. It's like, all right, can you carry this lead balloon? Can you carry the rocks in this backpack before we give you a jetpack? And it's kind of like one of those things where I think Edge really proved, they could have really cast him as something totally abhorrent, and I think that he could have made the fans pop for him. Whether that be booing or cheering, it's really that they can get a reaction that matters. Face or heel, it flips like a pancake, but does that really matter? It's the suspension of disbelief that allows wrestling to take you on that journey, to take you back in time to a more innocent period when you could be, young, and you could actually buy into a Superman like character like Hogan taking on some guy who could hardly walk to the ring, who had to be accompanied by a manager like Andre the Giant, or later the Big Show. Really the blueprint for that. Can you overcome this kind of this huge boulder in the road? That kind of wrestling archetype of storylines. Anyways, moving on from there. Yeah, Edge was a real virtuoso and a real utility player. Not that he was like a bench player in WWE. He was a multiple time champion and involved in some of the most memorable spots and matches that I could actually think of. And multiple ones of my favorite matches would probably involve Edge, so he really deserves to be here. Um, yeah. Number 10 on here is going to be someone whose name has been mentioned on this list earlier, which is Terry Funk. A man who's had one of the craziest careers of all time, in the sense that he started out as like an NWA style like wrestler, having classic feuds in the 70s and stuff, as like a cowboy type figure almost. He kind of transmuted into the veteran that gave ECW a sense of legitimacy. And as that being my favorite promotion, sad it's gone, but still, as that is my favorite promotion, I have to put Terry here for really being not only the guy who gave the impetus to Mick Foley and had some great matches with him, but really the guy who allowed that to flower into its greatest forms. And he, I think, allowed that to peak. They didn't make him into something stupid like Chainsaw Charlie. He didn't have. It was still crazy when he was like gonna actually brand someone with that cattle iron, even though I don't even know if they use cattle irons anymore. But even if it was not chronologically in order with what the fans might have been into at that point, it made sense, and it was really terrifying because Terry really, like, I heard Mick Foley say one time that Terry Funk really he was so believable because he said things, oh my eye, that's the worst Terry Funk impression ever. But he was like begging Mick for mercy, and it made it so. It almost reminds me of Ric Flair's classic retirement match versus like Shawn Michaels, where he was like, "I'm sorry, I love you," and then he super kicked him. So Terry kind of put that level of emotion and heart and really believability. One of the few guys who I think really had a like lengthy career renaissance that wasn't a disappointment. He turned into a hardcore wrestler, and he basically helped give birth to the division. Without Terry Funk, there probably wouldn't be hardcore wrestling as we know it today. And you don't have to be like a member of like some crazy like CZW level thing, some CZW spot, or getting thrown off a a huge 30-foot tall ladder to please people. You just have to be just beyond not giving a shit. You have to be beyond like that Randy Orton level of apathy. You have to make the simple things believable again, and that kind of goes a little bit back towards the idea of um, wrestling going back towards a more believable time when things were a simpler time, and I think they should do that. I really think they should. WWE is a huge fan of work shoots way too much. They try to make every shoot seem like, oh, he used the word fourth wall. That definitely means that this is unscripted and it's gone off the rails. I heard that Miz promo from a couple of years ago where Daniel Bryan actually walked out of the building, that was worked, but that he did go too far a little bit. Um, Sometimes though, I just think that they do this too much. They try to make it seem like that whole this is you know Phil Brooks talking to Paul Levesque, or is it gonna be Dwayne, or is it gonna be The Rock that shows up? And they've done this so many times over the years. It's like people know by this point it's scripted. So that whole blurring the line on something that's already been smudged like a huge skid mark, I think that it just doesn't work anymore. It's a storyline that died, kind of like that whole having someone who represents another nationality try to spark patriotism by carrying their flag. That's racist. It's stupid. Doesn't need to happen anymore. Um, what is somebody's big crime as a heel that they're from another place? Isn't that kind of dumb? Anyways, never mind. Let's move back onto the wrestling. From Terry Funk and his crazy hardcore days and his days as more of an NWA guy, he was always legitimate in both spots. But um, from Terry Funk to pretty much the exact opposite of him and Kurt Angle. Terry Funk was very comparable, just to sum him up, to a guy like Mick Foley, his protege, in the sense that it's like, he could talk, he could make you believe it with his heart. He wasn't necessarily a great technical wrestler. He probably had the worst moonsault ever, but it made you think he was about to burning hammer himself on his head. Um, uh, Terry Funk, though, even though he was a great character, he was a great presence, and he added tremendous legitimacy to ECW as a veteran. We're going to go on to number 11, pretty much his polar opposite. A guy who could also talk and add a lot of sincerity, maybe not to the level of Terry's heart, but Kurt Angle. He was one of the few guys who he arrived from winning a gold medal. He arrived in pro wrestling around the time of the boom as a cocky, a guy who basically said, I've made my bed. And I can sleep in it comfortably. I don't have to prove anything to any of you assholes. And he really made a great heel, playing that up, the condescension angle, or if he was playing up the angle of, just, I'm an American, I did something great 10 years ago. And no matter which angle he was playing up, Kurt Angle had such intensity. That was the main thing. Ultimate Warrior, for example, might not have been a scholar. It was hard to even understand what he was saying. But a guy like Kurt Angle, similarly, even though he wasn't a mushmouth, um, he was about the intensity more than what he was saying. Not that he never said anything funny or was never involved in some funny storylines, but I think it was his intensity and also just the ability he had in the ring. He was one of the few guys who I still remember a storyline with from TNA. Oh my god, that's horrible. I mean, anyways, never mind that. Never mind things like Shark Boy and that character, mass character Suicide. Um, TNA, oh man, could have been so much more sad. But Kurt Angle was one of the few guys, along with guys like Styles and Joe, who really, he actually made it seem legit. He actually made it seem, wow, that, you know, this is going to possibly be one of the best matches of the last generation or so. And Kurt Angle was involved in many of those, and he was probably the most accomplished athlete in the history of wrestling. I mean, gold medal, Olympian. I mean, there's really no one else, even if they, I mean, even a guy like Mark Henry with his world's strongest man thing, people who have actual black belts or something. Kurt Angle, I think, is probably the most accomplished wrestler in history in that sense, in a off kayfabe sense. But in kayfabe, let's get to that. That's what really matters here. Here comes a guy who, with not any prior experience outside the ring, on the mic or anything like that, he came in and he stole the show with his ability to actually talk and his ability to switch seamlessly between heel or face. How many guys can really do that? There's some guys who are so beloved that you can't really turn them heel. It'd be hard to imagine a heel Undertaker. Can you imagine him returning and not getting a crazy pop and then booing him like John Cena or something? Can you imagine a heel Jeff Hardy done right? Can you imagine stuff like that? A heel Mick Foley? I have a hard time imagining that working in a WWE type environment in today's world. Um, Kurt Angle, though, he was one of those guys who not only did he, and everyone expected him to have all the gifts in the ring, that was kind of his character. It was almost like Punk's gimmick was like, I live a cleaner life, I'm better than you, I'm stronger than you, I'm faster than you, come challenge me. But Angle really more so, he added the legitimacy to that by having the real world backing to it. And this is an example, of them not doing something insensitive or stupid, but actually successfully making someone's real life, um, their real life play into their character a little bit. I'm sure Kurt Angle, the guy, isn't walking around in a American flag leotard talking about how fantastic and accomplished he is. But he very well could, and everyone probably would still love him. He's able to make people react, and that's what matters in this sport, stage performance, in pro wrestling. Fuck all those facsimile names. It's pro wrestling, god damn it. Um, let's get on to number 12. Moving on from one of the best legitimate athletes and surprisingly good talkers without having had prior experience in Kurt Angle, moving on from him going all over the world and succeeding to probably one of the most successful um, real characters in wrestling, in the sense that you weren't meant to believe, really. I mean, after like 1994, maybe, when people were just really, really naive, you weren't meant to believe Shawn Michaels could have existed outside the ring. This was really one of the guys he was born, character and all, in the ring. He was really, and I don't mean that he's part of some crazy wrestling family dynasty. I mean that the HBK, the Heartbreak Kid character, was really born when he super kicked that guy through that glass window during that promo. And it's just like, um, Shawn, since his return from injury in the late 90s, I mean, he was part of DX, which was WWE's answer to the NWO when they were losing in the ratings. He's not only part of some of the best wrestling matches of the late 80s and to the mid 90s, but some of the best matches in WrestleMania history. He's one of the guys who's part of, I think, some of the most memorable promos of all time. He's another guy who could really do it all, another five-tool player. But he's one of the few people who didn't have to cannibalize his real-life character as like Shawn Michael Hickenbottom or something, or whatever his real last name is. He really was one of the first real mainstream characters in the mold of like Ric Flair or something to achieve legendary all-time success. And I know, again, that kind of like Jake the Snake was mentioned before, he's one of those guys who followed in the footsteps of people before him like Nature Boy, Buddy Rogers, or Ric Flair again. Greg the Hammer Valentine, Jimmy Hart in terms of flamboyancy. I gotta go. Well, next part.